We think about, and actually we have a good-looking crowd this morning. You guys look good. You're amazing. It's summertime. You're all here, and I appreciate that more than you know. Even if you're here for the ice cream, I'm so totally cool with that. You have no idea. I don't care why you're here, just that you're here. It's like I don't even care what you're wearing, just that you have clothes on. It's good. It's all good. That's our dress code. And you can let your friends know that because sometimes it comes up. I've been asked that, like, so if I came to your church, what should I wear? And I'm like, clothes. We like you to wear clothes. Like, what kind of clothes? I'm like, I don't care what kind of clothes. As long as, all the private parts are covered, we're good. Literally is where I live. So I appreciate that. We're going to continue this morning in the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapters 6 and 7. I'm going to do my best to get through 2 entire chapters again this morning. We'll see what happens. But we're resuming the story of Elisha, his story. And these particular stories, there's actually 3 stories that we want to try to cover briefly this morning. 3 different stories that on the surface, the second 2 are kind of related. There's a natural relationship that they have. The first one seems kind of odd and a little bit out of place. But what we find as we look at these 3 stories all together is they really do have a common theme that kind of draws them together. And so what I want you to do as you listen to the story, as you kind of think your way through this with me, is to listen for what you might see. Now that sounds awkward, I get it. I'm going to listen for what I might see, because usually when you listen for what you might hear. Thank you. I'm glad somebody's paying attention. Usually you listen for what you might hear. I'm going to ask you to listen for what you might see, and listen for what the characters in these stories might have seen. Not so much what they did see, but what they might have seen, because the element that all of these have together is simply vision. What we see versus what we might be able to see. The first story, we begin in 2 Kings chapter 6, and we find in verse 1 there, the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "See now, the place where we dwell with you is too small for us." Elisha, your house is just getting crowded. "Please let us go to the Jordan, and let every man take a beam from there, and let us make there a place where we may dwell." And so they have what is an honest growth logistical problem. When you begin to grow, it is not uncommon if you have a small place to outgrow it. If suddenly we were to grow by 100 people, for instance, fantastic. But if we were to grow, that's not outside the realm of possibility. Churches do that. They go through growth spurts just like people do. Even if we grew by, say, 40 people, suddenly this room would become small. We don't always think of it as small. If you're here, it's kind of a small room. It gets bigger when you sit down. Did you notice that? Have you guys ever noticed that when you sit down, the room gets bigger? I don't know what it is about this room, and maybe it's just because I don't sit in it very often. I'm usually standing if I'm in here. But I found that, standing, and when I sit down, the room I don't know. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need therapy. That could be. But anyway, so if, 40, 50 people came to church all of a sudden, we are very tight. We are very small. We'd be hurriedly cleaning out the balcony so we could put people up there, not just sound gear. And, you get much beyond about 50 people, and all of a sudden we start talking about another service. Why? Because growth, if you're in a small facility, means you need to figure something out. And so the sons of the prophets are here, they're staying with Elisha, and they're like, "Elisha, things are growing. God is gifting people with prophecy, and there are more people banding it together with us, but the place is getting a bit small. We should build." And so Elisha's like, "All right, go ahead." And so they're like, "Oh, but would you go with us?" And Elisha's like, "All right." Yeah, he's kind of an easygoing guy, not like Elijah was like, raining thunder down. So he's like, "Okay, we'll go." And so they get to the Jordan River, and they're there cutting down trees, because to build, you need wood. And so they're there, and the trees are there around the Jordan River, and they're cutting down trees, and they're shaping them. They're getting ready to go and build a new structure to house everybody there. And all of a sudden, one of the guys who's chopping wood, and you can almost picture him chopping, and all of a sudden he swings and there's nothing on the end of the stick. There's just, the axe head is just gone. And unfortunately, and you know where it is, right? Because if you're cutting wood near water with an axe and the head of the axe falls off the handle, where is it inevitably going to land? In the river. Because why not? And sure enough, here's what happens. The guy's swinging and all of a sudden the axe head goes flying. It goes out into the water and it's an iron axe head. And he goes to Elisha. Oh no! That was a borrowed axe. Well, of course it was, because prophets don't have farming implements. They don't have axes. And worse, it was an iron axe head. Now, that doesn't sound terribly important, and yet in this day and age, iron is something that is still of quite high value. It's stronger than bronze, and it's stronger than the other things they had, certainly more effective than a stone axe would be. But it's something that not everybody has. It's something that represents a, kind of a technological step forward. And he's like, that was borrowed. And iron, it doesn't float so good. You know that, right? Iron in water, it's going to sink every time. And sure enough, that's what happened. And so Elisha, this guy's freaking out. You got to see that in here. This is borrowed, this is expensive, and this is gone. This is a really big problem. And Elisha just like, let me see. And he walks over and he's like, got all these woods laying around. You know how it is when you cut a tree down, you got branches everywhere. And he's like, crack, crack. He's like, just throws a stick in the water, and all of a sudden that axe head just bubbles up to the top. He's like, all right, get your axe head. Is that normal? You know what happens when I throw a stick in the water? It floats. Right? You throw a stick in the water, the stick will float. The stick does not cause anything else in the water to float. I'm just saying. If you drop an axe head in the water and you throw a stick at it after the fact, not going to help. Because you're not Elisha. But Elisha performed a miracle. The prophet there got to see God do something amazing, but he almost missed it. Why did he almost miss it? He was freaking out. He was focused on his own problem, and he almost missed God solving it. He almost missed God taking care of his problem. Now, is Elisha a prophet? That's his role, right? This guy that was cutting wood, what was he? He was a prophet. So what would have happened if the guy had just chosen not to freak out and maybe talk to God for half a minute? Maybe he'd have got to throw the stick. Maybe he'd have got to do the miracle. But he was so busy freaking out, so focused, his vision was so focused on his own problem that he didn't see the solution that God had for him. That's kind of a small story. We don't talk about that one a lot, but it's there. We move on then to another miracle that happened. And it starts in verse 8, verse 9, thereabout. Let's see if I get the right verses here. Yeah, verse 8. Now the king of Syria was, and we talked about it already, the Syrians had been a problem to the Israelites. We talked last week about a guy named Naaman. You remember Naaman? He was a general. What did he have? No, he didn't. God cured him. He had leprosy, and then God cured him. And we said that Naaman was being used as an instrument of God, and God was giving Naaman victories, which sounded good until you realized those victories were over the Israelites. And so there was this ongoing conflict between the Syrians and the Israelites. And we get down to verse 8. Now the king of Syria was making war against Israel, and he consulted with his servants, saying, my camp will be in such and such a place. And the man of God, Elisha, sent to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. You can imagine this and this happens, and the scripture records, this happens not once or twice. This was something that was going on. So here's the Syrians. Ben-Hadad is sending raiders into Israel. He hasn't committed his full army. He's just sending contingents of troops. And he said, we're gonna set up camp here, and we're going to raid over here. We're going to set up camp here, and we're going to raid over there. We're going to set up camp here. And as he is giving to his officers their kind of their tactical elements and the plan and all of the locations and all that, Elisha is sending a message to the king going, hey, don't go over there because that's where the Syrians are going to be. And hey, get your people away from that area because that's where the Syrians are going to be. And hey, you might want to defend over here because that's where the Syrians are going to be. And so at every turn, Ben-Hadad finds his plan being thwarted by the Israelites, and it's beginning to be something that is supremely frustrating to him. And so he looks at his generals, and he looks at his captains and his officers, and he says, all right, now which one of you is for the Israelites? Because there is no way in his mind that his plans are being revealed to the king of Israel, and that the Israelites are so tactically astute that they're able to anticipate his every move, no matter how random, unless somebody is sharing his secrets with the Israelites. And all of the officers look around and they said to the king, King, it's not any one of us. There is a prophet in Samaria, and he hears every word you say. And he tells it to the king, and the king responds. Now, how do you feel if you're the king there? Because when God is listening to your conversation, where do you go? It's not like you can say, okay, let's come over here and have this conversation. It's not like you can go over here. There's no place you can go to get away from God hearing it, revealing it to a prophet who's then sharing it with the king. You're kind of really in a problem. And so he decides that he is going to deal with this problem at its source. He says, where does the prophet live? We are going to go and we're going to kill the prophet so that regardless of what God hears, he has no way of telling the king. Not a bad plan, honestly. Cut out the communications, right? Standard military procedure. First thing you do, knock out communications. And so that's what he's doing. He's going to knock out communications by killing Elisha, who was well known. And the people said, hey, Elisha lives in Dothan. I mean, Naaman had been to his house. He knows right where he lives. And so Ben-Hadad sends a contingent of troops to Dothan to deal with Elisha. And so early in the morning, the troops are come rolling up in there, and all of a sudden, Elisha's servant looks out, and he sees a Syrian contingent of soldiers coming to the house. Now, these guys aren't rolling up the way that Naaman and his guys did. These guys are rolled up bristling for battle. And you could tell the difference. When soldiers come to fight versus when soldiers come to talk, it's a lot different. I mean, they just look different. A soldier that's going to communicate with you looks different than a soldier who's going to kill you. There is a visual vacancy, determination in the eyes that comes with a soldier set on death than one who comes set on conversation. And so Elisha's servant, and we're not even told who he is. We're just told he's a young man. This is Gehazi's replacement because Gehazi is somewhere scratching himself and dealing with the whole leprosy thing. And so the servant is like freaking out because when you're a young man and you're there and all of a sudden the army's there and you know that you've been relaying messages between Elisha and the king about what the Syrians are doing, and all of a sudden the Syrian army shows up, you can put two and two together and get four. It isn't that complicated. And so this guy, he knows who they are, he knows why they're there, and he is scared. We all would be in that situation, right? And so he goes, Elisha, we got problems! And they did. Elisha's like, looking out the window. No, we're good. What? Because that's what young men say when they're scared. Their voice goes up octave. Elisha's like, no, we're good. We outnumber them. And he's like, there's two of us. There's more than two of them. I don't own a sword. You don't own a sword. We have a problem. And so Elisha goes, all right, God, just open his eyes, shut his mouth. Help him to see what I can see. And all of a sudden, the kid pulls the curtain aside again, and he sees another army. And this army is surrounding the army that just rolled up. And this army has got horses and chariots of fire and angels with swords. Trivia question for you. How many soldiers can one angel kill? If you're ever playing Biblical Trivia Pursuit, the answer is 185,000. Seriously. One angel can kill 185,000 soldiers. So the fact that there is an entire army of angels, does this pose a problem for that army? No, I mean, Ben-Hadad could have armed every citizen, brought them all. They're still outnumbered. Because until you get to 185,000 plus one, you don't even have a fight. Elisha wasn't concerned because he could see the army that's there, and he wasn't looking at the Syrians. And all of a sudden, the kid's like, wow, this is awesome. And then Elisha does something incredibly clever. He goes out of the house. May I help you? Yeah, we're looking for Elisha. Not the brightest apple on the tree. We're looking for Elisha. I'm not him. You're at the wrong place. Obviously, Naaman wasn't with this group because Naaman's been here before. And the guy's like, oh, okay. Sorry, my bad. And so Elisha's like, Lord, make them all blind. So he opened the eyes of his servant and then closed the eyes of the Syrians, and all of a sudden they're blind. That had to be a little weird, right? Because suddenly you can't see. You've been told you're in the wrong place. You're not sure if you believe it or not, but it doesn't matter anymore because you can't see. Who are you going to hit if you swing a sword? Maybe yourself, probably the guy next to you, but probably not Elisha. And so Elisha goes, hey, you guys seem like you're having trouble seeing. And they're like, really? What gave you the first clue? He's like, all right, you guys just, everybody put your hand on the shoulder of the guy next to you and follow me. I'll take you to Elisha's house. So you can only imagine what this looked like. This is the Syrian army, they kind of get themselves together, and they're literally like, shoulder in front of, hand on shoulder in front of the guy, and they're just walking, and Elijah's, careful, there's a bump. 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 You know how that goes, right? And the last guy forgets to tell anybody, and the guy behind him trips. And so Elisha leads them right into Samaria, the city, the capital city of Israel. Leads them right inside the city. And you can imagine the soldiers like, Elisha seems to be bringing the Syrian army with him. Should we close the gates? They don't really look like a threat from here. Kind of looks like they're playing, I don't know what they're doing, honestly. You can imagine reporting this from the king. I don't know, the Syrian army's coming, but they're all like in single file with one guy having his hand on the shoulder of the guy in front. It looks like they might be forming a limbo line or something, but there's no music. It's weird. It's kind of odd. So he brings him in. They close the gate after the soldiers get in there. And then Elisha's like, all right, God, this is going to be good. Let them see where they are. And they open their eyes, and there they are, surrounded, not by an angelic army that they can't see, but by an Israeli army that they most certainly can. And now they're inside of a closed, walled city with an army. And a king who's going to Elisha, should I kill him? It's like, happy birthday to me, man. And Elisha says, look, if you took these guys captives with your sword and your bow, would you kill them? And he's like, well, no, that's bad form. He said, well, feed them. Don't kill them. And so the king throws a huge feast for this army, and he feeds them all, and he sends them home back to Ben-Hadad. And you get down to verse 23, I think it is. Let's see if I can find verse 23. Yeah, so he prepared a great feast for them, and after they ate and drank, he sent them away, and they went to their master. So the bands of Syrian raiders came no more into the land of Israel. Doesn't that sound fantastic? Doesn't that sound amazing? You see, Elisha's servant, who really is the key here, what he saw was his own fears. What he might have seen was God protecting him from the things that made him afraid. He eventually did see that Elisha had to help him, but he saw only his fear. But then he got to see God protect him in the face of his fears. I love verse 23, the end of the verse, because such optimism. The Syrian raiders came no more to Israel. Doesn't that sound fantastic? Until you get to verse 24. And it happened after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went and besieged Samaria. So it sounds great. The raiders aren't coming anymore. Now they're bringing the whole army. That's awesome. I'm not going to send individual units. We're just going to gather everybody together, call up the reserves, we're going, and we're just going to besiege Samaria. Now, siege warfare is an ancient tactic. And the basics of this tactic are very simple. You take a large army, you surround a city, and you make sure that nothing gets in and nothing gets out. And then you just camp. It's a great way to wage war because assuming you have fair supply lines, which the Syrians did, and you can keep getting food and drink to your soldiers, you don't have to worry about the city. You can sit there literally and just party for like a month or 2 months. And as long as nothing gets into the city, guess what's going to happen to the city? Yeah. The shelves on the grocery stores are going to get bare in a hurry, aren't they? No city, regardless of how well fortified or how well provisioned, can withstand forever a siege. Because eventually they're going to run out of food and they're going to need to bring food into the city. And that was the case here. The siege lasted for a while to the point where they began trading in the open market. You could buy a donkey's head. How would you like that? Roast donkey's head for dinner. I'm not even sure how you would cook that edible. That's not the worst. They were selling dove doo-doo for food. That's gross. I hope none of you are like, and that's not the worst. Right? So in the city, people begin to eat people. Mothers begin to eat their babies. This is how bad things, and this is common in siege warfare. Because there is no food. It's so bad that the king himself is down to like half a dozen horses. Because they ate the rest. There's no food. What are we going to do? And so the king does what is completely natural in this situation. Verse 31. Then he, the king, said, God do so to me and more also if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today. Who did the king blame for the siege? Elisha. But who did the king really blame for the siege? Because Elisha is just the communicator. God. Don't we have that tendency when anything goes really wrong? We blame God. Why did God allow this? As though God flew a Syrian flag. How about you're a reprobate and you have a kingdom of heathens that are supposed to be godly? I don't know. And so the king sends word to Elisha, and Elisha's gathered in his little house there in the city, and he's got the elders of the people are there with him, and all of a sudden the king's messenger shows up, and as he's approaching, Elisha says to the guys who are there, he says, look, the king's messenger is getting ready to bust in on the door. Just ignore him because the king is right behind him. And by that, the king's servant comes busting in the door, and they ignore him because right behind him is the king, which is what you do. You send a messenger, and you follow about 8 feet behind him. And Elisha makes an astounding prophecy. And he said, tomorrow about this time, there is going to be so much food in Samaria that you're going to be selling it dirt cheap. Now, that's quite an astonishing prophecy for a city that's under siege, isn't it? So he makes this prophecy, and one of the king's officers is like, Elisha, you need to stop smoking whatever it is you smoke to get prophetic wisdom going here, because that just ain't gonna happen. He said, if the windows of heaven were to open and wheat were to fall, your prophecy could not come true. And Elisha said, you'll see it, but you're gonna die before you taste it. Isn't gonna happen. And the story there then kind of takes us near the end of chapter 6. The story transitions then to some lepers. There were 4 lepers who were living is not the right word, who were camping in the gate of the city. Now, they couldn't go into Samaria, and why couldn't they go into Samaria? They were lepers, and leprosy was highly contagious, and you're going to die, but starving to death is better than just like decomposing while you're alive and stuff start falling off. And so they're standing there, they're there in the gate because that's the only place they can go. And all of a sudden they have this conversation. And they're like, hey, we're sitting here inside the gate because it's the closest we can get to the city. They won't let us in. If we go in the city, we're going to die. Because they're starving to death in there. They're eating stuff. And if we stay here, we're lepers. We're going to die anyway. We have no food anyway. We're going to die if we go in the city. We're going to die if we stay here. Hey, let's go surrender to the Syrians. Worst case scenario, they'll kill us. Death, death, death. What does it matter where we die? That's the worst case scenario. Better case scenario, they'll take us prisoners and they might actually feed us as prisoners. They're like, wow, why didn't I think of that? And so they go ambling out to the Syrian army, and they get there to the edge of the Syrian army, and they get to the first tent, and they're waiting for the guard, and they're like, excuse me, I'd like to surrender. Like knocking on the tent post. No answer. Hello, we'd like to surrender. You hear the wind whistling through the tent, but not much else. Which is just odd, because when you get an army of men who have been kind of camping around a city for a while and like partying for nights on end, they're either making a lot of noise cleaning their armor, a lot of noise partying, or a lot of noise snoring. Right? And you get there and there's nothing. Lifting the tent flap, there's nobody home. But look at this. They've got clothes, and they've got silver, they've got food. Let's eat. They go in, and they eat. They're like, hey, silver. Fill in their pockets with whatever they can. They grab some of the clothes up. They take it and they hide it. Where do leprous dudes hide stuff when they can't get in the city? I have no idea. Excuse me. So they go to the next tent, and there's nobody there. And they're like, put everything they can in their pockets again. They like grab some clothes, and they take it over, and they hide. And all of a sudden it goes, oh. There's nobody here. Now, they have no idea what happened. But here's what they do know. Every one of these tents has food in it, and clothes, and money. And just behind them is a city that has none of the above. They're like, oh, today is a day of deliverance. Today is a day of victory. We need to go let the people know that God has delivered them, that there's food out here. And so they go running back to the city, and they go shouting up at the guards, the army is gone, the food is here, come on out. And of course the king does what kings do. Nah, didn't happen. I don't believe it. Here's what happens, and it's evening time. And he's like, here's what happened. The Syrian army, they've retreated back behind their camp, and they want to lure us out into their camp. And as soon as we get out there, they're going to spring out and just kill us all. Kind of they've set themselves up as their own bait for their own trap kind of deal. And so one of the commanders comes to the king and said, hey, king, if we hang here, we're going to die. If we go out there, we might die. Worst case scenario, we're going to die. He says, let me get some men, let us go out and let us, military folk, check on what's out there, because obviously the government knows better than the people what's going on, and they can see. And so they said, let us go out and we'll check. That was sarcasm, in case you didn't know. That we're going to go out and check on, what's out here, and we'll see. And so the king, begrudgingly allowed the men to go. And they're like, okay, here, just take the last couple horses, get a chariot, and go chase. See what you can do. And so they go out with a couple chariots, and they go running out. And sure enough, when they get to the tents of the Syrians, guess what they see? Tents, food, clothes, silver, weapons, all the stuff that you would normally see, just no army holding these things. And so they go through the camp, and they go behind the camp, and then they look, and as they go, they see that there is a beaten path that's heading back towards Syria. And all along this path, there's just armor and weapons and stuff that's strewn, looking like an army literally got up and ran away, dropping all of the weight they could as they ran, which is exactly what happened. Because what had happened in the camp of the Syrians that nobody in Israel knew about, except probably Elisha, was that God had caused the Syrian commanders to hear what sounded like an army on the move. Because again, armies are loud things. And they immediately thought that somehow that the Israelites had gotten word out through the siege. Somehow they had gotten word to the Hittites, and they had gotten word to the Egyptians, and that there were armies converging on their position from two different sides. And they were not prepared to fight a war on three fronts. And in panic and fear, the Syrian army literally ran back to Syria, without their horses, without their food, without their weapons, without their armor, dropping everything they could as they literally ran with their tail between their legs, chased by ghosts, back to Syria. And so the soldiers, they come back to Samaria, and they come back to the city, and they shout up at the king who's standing there on the wall, and they're like, it's just like they said, there is food out here. And there is nobody protecting it. Open the gates. And so the king sends somebody out to open the gates and try to manage the flow of people as if, guess who it was? Elisha. No, it was the guy who said, though God opened the windows of heaven, this could not possibly come true. So the king sends this guy out. This guy opens the gates, and as soon as he gets the gates open, bam, everybody just literally ran right over him. Trampled to death by thousands of starving people trying to get to the food. He saw it all from the wall, but he died before he tasted a morsel. It's a tragedy. You see, what did the king and the people of Samaria, what did they see? They saw only their need. They could only see that they were starving and that there was no food. But what might they have seen? They might have seen God's provision. It wasn't the way they expected it, but it was there. And sure enough, that afternoon, there was so much food in the city that it sold for dirt cheap. Because that army was well provisioned. They just weren't the most courageous bunch in the world. So we'll pause there. Pause Elijah's story there. You see, we are a lot like the people in these stories. We have a tendency to focus on all the wrong things. As we go through our lives, we naturally focus on the wrong things. We focus on our fears. We focus on our problems. We focus on our needs. These are natural tendencies because our problems, our needs, our fears, they are loud, aren't they? They are ever present. They're right before us. I have no trouble hearing the voice of my problems. I have no trouble hearing the voice of my fears. I have no trouble hearing the voice of my needs because they're ever present. They're in my face and they are screaming their full heads off. And so I naturally see them. But what might I see if I were to stop looking at me and start looking at God? What might I see? Instead of seeing my problems, I might see His abilities. And they're pretty amazing at that. Floating an iron axe head is pretty amazing. Instead of seeing my fear, I might see His protection. And instead of seeing my need, I might see His provision. How about you? Where do you naturally focus your vision? Where do you naturally focus your attention? I know most of you well enough to say that I think probably you naturally, like I do, focus it very linearly, very much around you at the things that are clamoring for your attention. And you see your problems. You see your fears. You see your needs. But what might we see? What could we see if together we would focus our attention, focus our vision, focus our sight on God instead of self? Wouldn't it be amazing, like any one of these characters, to see God instead of self? Wouldn't it be amazing to see what He is able to do for you, maybe through you? Wouldn't it be amazing to actually feel secure and to see and to sense His protection? We don't often think about it or talk about it, but as a child of God, you are completely invulnerable. Nothing can touch or harm you that God does not allow. But we don't see His protection because we see only our fear. Wouldn't it be awesome to see and to sense God's provision, understanding that His timing is not always like ours did? He absolutely was going to provide for those people, but they had to starve a while first. You say, why was that His plan? Just was. It'll be that way in your life too. Sometimes you'll have a need, and in a microwave economy that we live in, we think we need everything right this second. You wake up in the morning, you slap the thing in a carrier, coffee. Forget grind, brew, that whole 12-minute process. That's ancient and long. You know what I'm saying. God has promised to provide. He doesn't always promise to provide it when you think you want it or when you think you need it. He's going to provide it when you most need it and when He decides. But what an amazing provision if we could see Him instead of ourselves. If we could learn to focus our vision on God instead of on ourselves, our crazy faith would actually keep us sane in a crazy world. That's what's at stake. So the question is today, what do you see? Father, we love You. Thank You for these tremendous stories and the tremendous power that they have. Father, I would confess for myself and on behalf of most of us I do not see, we do not see you because we're so busy looking at ourselves. Father, I see my problems. I see my fears. I see my needs. And they consume me. And they rob me of the ability to see you. God, help me to see you. Help me to choose to look at you instead of myself. Because I want to see your abilities, and I want to see your protection, and I want to see your provision. I'm tired of seeing what I have to offer. And I desperately want to see what you have. Father, would you help us to keep our eyes on you? Well, thank you in Jesus' good name.